why would I want a stereo compressor if I'm not dealing with a true stereo source? Which brings us back to what we explained in the beginning. If the two have nothing in common, it's just two mono sources playing individual things independent of each other. I want to preserve their natural dynamics, and I don't want the left guitar to change because of the right guitar. That doesn't make sense to me.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedict Hein. If you are new to the show, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're making your own records, you want them to sound better, this is the right place. You found the right place for this. And if you are already a listener, welcome back. We're so glad to have you. Thank you for your loyalty and for you just being a part of this. And today we're going to get a little more technical than the last couple of episodes. So we had a bunch of interview episodes lately. This time we're going a little more technical. We're talking about a thing that is not, I think so at least, not so often talked about on podcasts or YouTube videos. But I think it's really important. We're talking about dual mono versus stereo, specifically when it comes to compression. And before you now close the podcast app and leave us because you don't know what we're talking about, let me quickly explain why that matters. So this can be the difference between a stable, solid center in your stereo image and a wonky center that will provide, the solid foundation that your groove needs. It can also add some extra clarity, width, and separation to your rhythm guitars, toms, or any other stereo or double track thing that you have in your arrangement. So this stuff is important. It's often overlooked. A lot of people, I think, are confused by this. So this is why we wanted to cover it today. And as always, I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen-Flood. Hello, Malcolm. How are you?
Hey, Benny. I'm great, man. Good to be back as always. We're almost at the end of what is this? Is this our third year or fourth year? Third year, right?
So the fourth year, because it's 200 episodes and and 1 year has 50 weeks, right? So 52.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Wild.
We're going to have our 4-year sort of anniversary in January, I think, or February somewhere.
Yeah. Can't wait.
Yeah, totally. It's phenomenal. It's crazy to think that we haven't missed a single week since we started. And it's very cool. And also, I'm kind of surprised that we still have things to talk about. In the beginning, I was worried that
so many things to talk about.
Yeah, in the beginning, like after the first year or so, or when we were trying to come up with topics for the first year, I was like after 20 ideas or so, I was like, that's all we have. That's all we know. Like there's nothing more to talk about. Turns out there's a lot more, and we'll keep going. Yeah. All right. So I don't know. We haven't done a true banter in a while, right? We always had these interview episodes, and so I don't know if there's anything going on in your life that's worth sharing.
I mean, something that's exciting for me is like later today, right after we record this episode or our next episode, I'm going to be going to shoot a documentary as like the head camera person. I've never done that before, so that's exciting for me. We're just I'm like self-producing with a buddy a documentary idea. I won't get into what that idea is yet. But I'm very excited to go and shoot it. It's going to be very fun.
I didn't know about that. That's awesome, man. So you got location sound, you got music work, you got photography, and now also videography.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's all creative stuff, right? It's exciting. Really cool.
Yeah, very excited.
Awesome.
How about you, man? What's going on in Benny's world?
So I went snowboarding for the first time with my kids this weekend.
Whoa.
So I'm snowboarding all my life. I've been snowboarding all my life basically, but this time I took my kids for the first time, which was very awesome. Bought them some snowboards, and we went out and did our first tries, and which was really cool. Made me super proud to watch that. And I decided because usually we wanted to. We talked about it, and like all the kids go skiing usually, and they need to learn that for school and all of that, and all the other kids do it as well. But I've never been a skier, and I probably won't ever be one. So I just decided, okay, they can learn to ski, but if they're going with me, I'm going to just teach them how to snowboard. That's the only thing I know. So, and then they can make a decision for themselves. Fun. So we go snowboarding. They wanted to do it anyways. They asked me for it, so I'm all for it.
Awesome.
So we did that.
How did they like it?
They enjoyed it a lot. So before we did that,
awesome.
I actually gave them, there's different words for that. There's like a snow surfer, snow skate type of thing where you're not attached to the board. You just stand on it and you can, basically like a skateboard in snow. I got them 2 of these, just borrowed them and let them try and have fun with it for a while before we made the decision to actually buy snowboards. And they loved it. And they actually did pretty well too. So then they said they want to have a real snowboard. So yeah, that's why I got them some, and now
Unreal.
we're doing it.
Little shredders. That's
yes,
great.
Exactly. Totally. So yeah, that was
fun.
the main part. That was how I spent the weekend, and also we decorated, Christmas stuff, and kids. Well, I probably wouldn't have done it on my own, but the kids said, "There's no way we're not going to have a Christmas tree and all the Christmas decorations," so we did that
right
together. So that's out of the way too. I actually like it, so it's great.
Oh, great. Yeah. I'm exhausted by all this Christmas stuff. It's like, there's already been so many Christmas parties and stuff. Oh, man. Put me back into real life soon.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That's part of it. And when, once it's done, or when I'm at these parties or when I'm doing these things, I actually enjoy it. I just don't want to, it's hard for me to get going, or I just have so many other things that I'd rather do in a way. But then
just like exercise and eating well goes out the window in the holidays for me.
For example, yeah. Anyway, but it's also cool. It's a nice, cool season. Yeah, and then the other thing I have to announce is, I almost forgot about that in the beginning. We have 2 more spots officially left in our coaching program, the Self-Recording Syndicate. Before we stop registrations for a while, we need to build out some more systems, maybe expand the team, think about some things, and probably also increase rates, to be honest. So this will happen in 2024 at some point. And for now, we take on 2 more students. I got a few more calls scheduled to the end of the year. So if you are interested in joining the coaching program, please go to the selfrecordingband.com/call and apply for the Self-Recording Syndicate. I have no doubt that I'm going to fill these 2 spots very, very quickly. So if you want to be a part of that, please apply. And then, whoever is a great fit will get into this, and then we're going to close it for a while. So just going to announce that because we have like 40 students in it right now, which is about how much I can handle at the moment. And then we'll, make some decisions as to like how we can scale without compromising what we offer to our students.
Absolutely. That's so awesome, man. And huge thank you to all the listeners. That's like, that wouldn't be possible without all of you out there listening.
100.
Apparently, to the stats we just checked, the thousands of you. It's awesome.
Yeah, really. Thank you. Because it's also the feedback that we get from you and the questions, the comments. This really helps us make better content for this show. That's one part of it. But it also helps me serve my students better, because it teaches me a lot about the problems you have, about what you're struggling with, what your goals are, all of this. So really, thank you. Thank you a lot. Okay, let's get to this episode, right? And
let's do it.
Cool. Let's start with talking about the basics here, like the difference between mono and stereo, actually, because I think we need to clarify a few things before we can dive into the dual mono versus, true stereo thing on compressors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where do you start? Like, what's...
Okay. So where I think we should start is, trying to separate what they actually are from each other. And because there is some terminology that is regularly used by all of us audio recording people all the time that is incorrect. And that's okay. I don't think Benny and I want to convince you to change how engineers and musicians communicate about recording stuff like guitars. But I think it is important to understand that it's incorrect. Why it's incorrect, and then just keep on going using the incorrect words. It's totally fine. It gets the point across.
Yeah.
And like the most common example, especially in like rock music, is when you have like a double guitar performance. You record one guitar, you pan it hard left, you record a second guitar take of that same thing, a double, and pan it hard right. Now you've got 2 guitars coming left and right, and we say, all right, we got stereo guitars, right? Let's record some stereo guitars, and we do that. But that's not actually stereo, that's just dual point source mono, right? We've got 2 mono performances playing at the same time, coming out of different speakers, but it's not like we made a stereo recording, really, technically.
Yeah.
Whereas to give you, if you're like, all right, well then what the hell is stereo? If you have an XY set over your drum kit as the overheads, 2 microphones capturing the same source in a stereo field, now you have a stereo recording. You have captured a recording of something that has width.
Yeah.
Where if you had recorded the same drum kit twice and then panned it hard left and right, that would be again mono.
Yeah. Another example would be any sort of stereo synth that you use. If that is like stereo, whatever the output of that synthesizer is, that is a stereo source, right? It's not dual mono. It has actual stereo content in the sound itself. A piano mic'd with 2 mics can be a true stereo source. A choir, if you have a group of people singing and you're pointing 2 mics at them and you pan those left and right, you got one performance, but it's still wide and stereo. Those would all be stereo recordings. versus a second take of the same thing recorded with one microphone will sound like a stereo thing, but it's actually dual mono. It's two mono sources. They just pan to wherever.
Exactly. Now, one more bit of information to confuse you all. If you stick, let's say, two SM57s beside each other on a guitar speaker and record those, and then you're blending them, you've got them just panned the exact same, so they're both coming up the middle, for example, and then you're just blending the volume to kind of find a tone you want. You haven't made a stereo product then either.
Nope.
So you've got two mics on the same source, but you've still made a mono thing.
100%. And no, I'm going to leave it like that. I want to add one more thing, but that would definitely be confusing. No, let's leave it like
I think that's enough to grasp
absolutely.
it. Like it's not actually hard to grasp at all. It's just like when you think about it, like, oh yeah, that's, we actually haven't made stereo guitars is kind of the typical thing, right?
Absolutely. As long as, if a thing is panned to one, direction, like the center or left or right or anywhere in between, but it's just one source, it's always mono, you just pan it somewhere. And if it's like two mics or two parts of it pan to different sides of the same performance, it's going to be stereo. So, all right.
So now we know that, and you can make a decision of how you're going to record.
Yeah, just rewind and listen to this 15 times, and then you'll get it. What we just said. No. So now we got this. Sorry for interrupting you, Malcolm. All right, how do we move on from here?
Well, I mean there is there's one more thing. And this is probably what you were going to say, Benny decided not to.
Okay.
But there's certain miking techniques that are stereo, right? Mm-hmm. Like XY, space pair kind of thing. And you can record guitars in stereo. Like I just wanted to cover guitars in particular because I think we've just pretty much like all of that said, okay, guitars are actually mono, but you can record stereo guitars. It's just you probably don't want to, and you're probably what you're talking about doing is probably mono. Okay, now I'm done.
All right, now we have to explain though what that would mean because now you just started it. So
okay, you're
that's
right.
what I wanted to say. So any amount of close mics on the guitar cab, always mono because it makes no sense to pan them apart. It's never going to be wide anyways. So you blend those mics, it's always going to be a mono source no matter how much microphones you throw on that cabinet.
Yeah, point source mono.
Exactly. However, if you put a pair of room mics into that room in XY or whatever, with some distance to the cab so that there's actual stereo information, like something our ears would in the room perceive as like stereo because it's bouncing off the walls left and right and stuff. So if we capture that, then we would have, in addition to the mono recording, we would have a stereo pair. And now we could we could pan that mono recording to one side, but we could leave the stereo room panned hard left and right. So this would provide, some sort of image. And so there's a mix between the mono guitar and then the stereo image. Same with like drums, close mics plus overheads or rooms. You have the close mics, they are all mono. Even if you pan them left and right, they are all mono sources. But then you have a stereo pair of overheads or a stereo pair of room mics. These are actual stereo recordings. There you go.
Now, here's a scenario, Benny. You've got your favorite JCM 800 Marshall guitar head, and it's being run into two separate 4x12 cabs. All right?
Yep.
But those 4x12 cabs aren't in the same room. They are in different isolation chambers where if you stick a mic on each of those cabs, there is no crossover bleed between those two cabs. So the microphones only hear the cab they're on. There's no information reaching it from the other one. What have we created?
To me, honestly, that's still mono.
Me too.
There's no, if they're not in the same room, there's no, no stereo image if I'm standing in front of it. There's two isolated mono sources. And probably, if there's no delay in between, they would, even if you pan them hard left and right, it won't really sound wide. It would still sound like a mono thing. It's the same take.
It's still going to sound pretty mono.
Yeah. So to me, that's all mono. There's trickery you can do, like some bands with one guitar player, they would play through two rigs, slightly delay one, and then pan them hard left and right, which creates the illusion of like a double tracked or stereo thing. But those is all not really stereo. It's like,
psychoacoustics.
Yeah.
And even if those cabs were in the same room, like it still would pretty much result in a very mono vibe. So there we go. I think we've covered it pretty good now. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. Let's get to why this matters, or like what we actually wanted to talk about, which is like dual mono and stereo in terms of compression. So
yes, because I think everybody's probably seen this by now, and they open up a plugin and there's a switch on there or a button and that says dual mono or stereo. And like, it doesn't say or, but it's a selector and you can click to put the plug into dual mono or to stereo mode. And that is what we want to kind of demystify and explain, and then tell you how to use it and why you would use it.
Yep. I have to say though, it's probably different for you than like compared to many of our listeners, because Pro Tools handles this a little differently. So in most, you see, if you open up a plugin, I think you can change it from, you can choose between like dual mono and stereo, and you see these options. I think in most DAWs, and I might be wrong about the Pro Tools thing, but that's how I remember it. But in most DAWs, you just open the plugin and it will be, there's no dual mono or stereo option. It's just whatever the plugin is. And then it automatically turns into a stereo thing if it's a, if there's 2 channels on the track, and it will be a mono thing if there's 1 channel. And there's not the dual mono switch, but it oftentimes only gives you like a link button or something where you can link or unlink the left and right. But I don't, for example, in Cubase, there's never a switch that says like dual mono. That's not a thing, unless the plugin itself does that, which is not often the case.
Yeah, no, I actually was referring to the plugin, the Vertigo bus comp, for example.
All right.
It's got a dual mono, but you're right. Pro Tools does have the ability to just run 2 instances on any stereo track in dual mono, but that'll make more sense once we explain what this is.
All right, good. So in most cases, you'll see, in most cases you'll see linked and unlinked, and we're gonna get to that. There's 2 different things that this could mean. So linked and unlinked, it might be dual mono versus stereo, depending on how they label it. And then there's things like the Waves plugins, where you have to be careful that you actually choose the stereo version for a stereo track and not the mono plugin on a stereo track. That's with Waves, at least in Cubase. If I can open a mono instance on a stereo track, which won't ever work. That's a whole different thing. Just make sure if you have a stereo instance, like a plugin that is capable of processing 2 tracks at the same time, that this does not automatically mean it's actual stereo. It could be dual mono, it could be stereo. You could switch between the 2, and you can be intentional about it. That's what we're talking about here. Yes. So you want a plugin that's able to process 2 channels at a time, and now you have control over how this happens. This is what we're talking about. And so
absolutely,
the 2 things that I meant that linking could mean is, 1, you could link the controls of the left and right channel, meaning if you turn one knob, like the threshold, I mean, we're talking about compressors more than anything here. So
yes,
if you adjust the threshold and you see maybe a stereo compressor that actually has 2 sets of identical controls, for example, and you grab the threshold knob on one and you turn it, the other one moves accordingly. Yeah, like the controls are linked for both channels. That's one thing that it could mean, just linking the controls. There's another thing in the background, though, that happens, which is what the compressor actually listens to, like what the compressor sees, the signal that it reacts to. And this is called the sidechain, or the detection circuit. And there's a different form of linking where you not only link the controls, but you're actually linking those sidechains. Meaning, if the left channel sees a certain level and it goes past the threshold, the left channel will react accordingly, like will do whatever you tell it to do. And then the right channel will follow that same thing. Like the sidechain is being summed together, basically, and the 2 channels see the same thing and they react the same way. So not only the controls are linked, but also what those different channels see is the same. And so when there's a lot of level on one channel, but not on the other, still both channels will react, right? So this is like linking the sidechain versus unlinking the sidechain, which means if there's a big peak on the left side, but not on the right, only the left channel will compress and the right side will not, or not as much, and vice versa. So you can still have the controls linked to have the same settings on both channels, but the behavior of the 2 channels might be different because of the difference in like what happens left and right. Does that make sense? Okay.
Exactly. Which is my favorite way to use a bus compressor.
Yes, yes and no. We got it. Yeah, exactly. We'll get into that. So, an example, just before we dive into how this works and all those things. Just an example, so you know what I'm talking about. Let's say you have a tom group, which is, you could argue that it's not really a stereo thing, but it's like definitely a group of things, and stuff happens left and stuff happens right. So you have your toms grouped to a stereo channel, and you have the rack toms. Yeah, and you have the rack tom, for example, because drummer's perspective is the way to go. You have the rack toms on the left and the floor toms on the right.
Benny and I disagree about this.
Yeah, totally.
If you're new to the podcast, we do this totally opposite.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong, just so you know. But yeah, I pan it drummer's perspective. So meaning the higher toms, the rack toms are to the left, and then it goes from left to right. It gets lower, basically, to the floor toms. So if you now have a compressor on your toms bus, on your group, where you're summing the toms together to one group where you process them together, assuming you're doing that. And you have a compressor there to compress the toms as a whole. Now, if you keep the compressor linked, which is the default on many of those compressors, if you just insert it, you choose a setting and you go and you don't do anything about it, then that means if there's a loud floor tom hit, both sides will compress. And if, let's say, the drummer hits the rack tom and the floor tom at the same time, and the floor tom is louder than the rack tom, it will still compress both sides the same way because of that louder floor tom. However, if you unlink the two side chains, you have the same settings, but the side chains are not linked. The right side will only listen to that floor tom, or predominantly listen to that floor tom, and the left side will hear the rack tom louder, and they will behave slightly different based on like what happens on those sides, which is more accurate basically, because the right side will compress harder if the floor tom is louder, the left side won't compress as much if the rack tom is a little quieter. So the two act like independently of each other. That would be one example. Same with guitars. Double tracked rhythm guitars. Same thing. One side might do chugs, palm mutes, lots of level. The other side might do some open chord or like single notes, something that has a lot less level basically. If you send the two to the same compressor with the sidechains linked, the quieter guitar will be ducked as soon as the louder guitar does the chugs, the palm mutes. And if it's unlinked, the quiet guitar stays as it is, and the louder guitar gets controlled as it becomes louder, right?
So by unlinking them and having them responding independently, you're actually going to end up with a more uniform result, because it's taming, the peaks of both sides to get them closer together, rather than like if there is a loud tom on the left and it's linked, now you just turn down the quiet side a bunch as well for kind of seemingly no reason in that circumstance.
Yes, exactly. Now there is pros and cons to this, because there's a reason for why you can link the two, and that is if you're dealing with something that has, and we might actually disagree there, Malcolm. I'm looking forward to hearing your opinion here. So, for example, on a bus compressor or a drum, let's say a drum bus compressor, you have the kick and the snare in the center, and I personally want those to stay in the center and be there like rock solid and don't move left or right or anything. I want that solid foundation, the center of my image. Now, if I link the two sides, I can accomplish that, because no matter what happens, the two sides always compress the same way. They listen to the same signal. The stereo image stays the same. So the image doesn't shift. The levels shift in a sometimes weird way, but the image doesn't shift, never. Like it always stays the same. Both sides get the same control, react to the same signal. Everything stays exactly where it was in terms of stereo image. If you unlink the two, it could mean that the kick and snare slightly move left and right, depending on what happens left and right? Because they come out of the center, which means they come up out of both speakers at the same time. And now if one side is getting more compression than the other for some reason, it means that everything slightly shifts depending on what exactly happens in terms of compression. I personally don't want that with drums. So for drums, I usually go with, like for a drum bus, I usually go with linked, or if there is a control where I can gradually control that, I might go 50% linked or something, but I rarely go completely unlinked on a drum bus. But it depends on the source.
Makes perfect sense to me.
But it depends on the source though. With some tracks you can get away with unlinked, it's perfect, and with other tracks where I feel like the center is not solid anymore, I will move to linked. It depends on the source. But you can be intentional about this, right? So
no, I would totally agree with you. Like in that circumstance right there, I would probably gravitate to a stereo setting, which is linked. And then go with that, because when like the kick and the snare are again mono, not stereo instruments. Usually they're close mics anyway. So what we're hearing, and if that's being played up the middle, those discrepancies in left and right volume caused by an unlinked dual mono compressor is going to cause it to move to whatever side is is loudest essentially. It's pretty. Like it'd have to be pretty dramatic for you to really feel like it's moving all over the place, but you might just like lose this little bit of a clear center stereo image.
I might even automate it. Sorry,
yeah, you really could. You absolutely could. Now let's move to an example where I really like a dual mono unlinked compressor, and that is on the mix bus, because now, and it's not always, this isn't a rule, this is of course use your ears, but that's like my instinct is usually to try dual mono first on a mix bus, and that is because we're now dealing with more than just one instrument. We could have a lead guitar that just spikes in on the one side for one part of the song, or like it changes like dynamically so much and all over the stereo image, and they're not necessarily related to each other like a drum kit is kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah.
There's still an argument to be made that you're losing something in the middle, I guess. But I find that like what a coarse kicks in and dynamically things get a lot denser, I find that my like mix collapses a lot less if I'm in dual mono in most cases.
Yeah, absolutely. It leads to a wider result with a little more clarity to me. Like, it's a little interesting. Even a slight movement on the mix bus, as you said, it won't be that dramatic anyways, that the center shifts dramatically, but even a slight movement is for me often desirable. It creates a sense of width and like a three-dimensionality versus like the linked thing oftentimes just sounds a little too narrow, and I don't want the left guitar to become a lot quieter when someone hits the floor tom on the right or something, So I want that, little bit of movement, and it actually sounds a little more dynamic as well, because some of the transients are still intact while others get tamed, and it's a little more exciting overall to me. Yeah, it doesn't collapse. Like
I'd agree.
Said. Yeah,
a time when I don't want that though, and that's when I want like a really pumpy mix. Because you can pump a dual mono compressor for sure, but I think like the pump that I think sounds cool and exciting is a stereo pump where like everything's just pumping.
Yes.
Everything's getting pushed and pulled in that elastic band kind of way, and that's when I'm like, all right, mono is going to be the way. This is aggressive and very noticeable.
You mean stereo, mono?
Oh, stereo. Yeah. Sorry, yes. My mistake. Yeah, stereo I prefer for a like pumpy mix.
Yeah.
So yeah, the different tools for different jobs, I guess. Yeah. There.
And also in those situations where you want that pumpy mix, it's usually something more vibey, anyways, where I also don't need the super wide image anyway. So it's okay that it might be a little narrower. That it might even, like, the stereo image might not be as exciting, but if I want the pump, I want it to feel like a cohesive sort of band thing anyways, that's not necessarily larger than life. And so I'm okay with the fact that it might sound a little more narrow, and it's more glued together, and it's moving and pumping. And yes, the guitars get quieter when the loud tom comes in, but that's what I want. That's pretty much the sensation you have when you're at a loud live concert, and your ears do like some sort of compression actually, where when it's loud, you hear that pump just because of the sheer volume in the room, and you can create sort of that feel through a pumping bus compressor. And so in that case, for me, it's totally fine if it sounds a little more narrow and not as like super wide. So
totally. Yeah. And it's really easy to just click on and off.
Yeah, exactly.
And just listen, right?
Exactly.
Now, we just described like two common scenarios that are very logical, I think. But another scenario I want you to apply this concept to is like problem solving. And the example that I just thought of is like a really poorly recorded, spaced overhead drum mic setup. So you've got like one, this is the classic, where there's like one mic that's just like 3 feet lower than the other mic. And that one's over the hi-hat. The low one is the worst because hi-hats are already loud. Yeah. And so now you've got, your main stereo pair, and the hi-hat's just like 12 dB louder than everything else. That can be really well served by a dual mono compressor, that when that hi-hat comes in, it just gain reduces that side heavily and hopefully levels out our stereo pair a little bit. I mean, there's manual ways that you'd probably end up needing to do if it was that dramatically bad, but like that's an example of like, we need to try and make these sides more uniform. Let's use dual mono to kind of fix the recording.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the examples where I absolutely always go with dual mono, just because anything else just wouldn't make sense to me. And I only discovered that not too long ago, honestly. For the longest time, I ignored that pretty much. I have to be honest about this. Like a few years ago, I started really being intentional about this, but now I never use stereo on the following things. Any guitar bus or rhythm guitar group where there's clearly different performances left and right, and they are hard pan, where like the left and right have nothing in common, I would never use a stereo compressor anymore, because why would I? The two have nothing in common, and it's like it's putting a compressor on the left guitar and another compressor on the right guitar. You just do it in one instance, and you link the control, so it's easier for you, if that makes sense. Yep. But why would I want a stereo compressor if I'm not dealing with a true stereo source? Which brings us back to what we explained in the beginning. If the two have nothing in common, it's just two mono sources playing individual things, independent of each other. I want to preserve their natural dynamics, and I don't want the left guitar to change because of the right guitar. That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, never say never. There might be a situation where it makes sense, but usually this is like typical dual mono for me. So my guitar bus, my rhythm guitar, or my rhythm bus in my template gets a dual mono bus compressor that reacts differently to the left and right. Same thing is for If I have a backing vocal group, for example,
Yeah,
where the it's all individual backing vocal tracks, right? You might have a stack of harmonies, octaves high, low, third, fifth, whatever, harmonies, doubles, whatever, like a vocal stack. It's all individual performances, and you have them in pairs. You have one left and one right, and so I could put a compressor on each of these voices, or I can put one on a bus and unlink the channels, and then it would treat left and right independently. And this is another example where I would definitely do this. I don't want the quieter vocal to become even more quiet because there's a louder vocal on the other side, right? So
right, yeah. Now on the vocal example, if it was every track was doubled, so there's like a high octave and there's a left and a right, and there's a low octave and there's a left and a right, then I might be fine with just a stereo.
Yeah, but because the two are very similar, then yeah.
The two are very similar. They're probably going to be about the same, especially if they were compressed on the way in. But if I only have one of each, it's a very natural like band in a room harmony setup where there's like, there's going to be a low third and a low fifth or something.
Yeah.
And I need to pan those apart from each other. The different frequencies of those voices will hit the compressor differently.
Yeah.
So dual mono really makes sense there, right? Otherwise that baritone's going to just blow out the compressor.
100%. Yeah, exactly. Also, this is a thing you can use, and this is kind of one of the tricks to more loudness with less artifacts, by the way. So you can also unlink or partially like unlink limiters or any compressors you use for loudness, because you don't have, this will make your limiter work less hard and you still achieve the same amount of loudness. And it avoids the typical thing that happens sometimes when you limit something really hard and then the guitars start crackling, or, there's a loud thing happening on one side and then the other side starts to get like distorted audibly. This doesn't happen anymore if you unlink the limiter. And so you can push the limiter a little harder because overall it's working less because it's focusing on the individual channels more, and it doesn't do all the limiting all the time, even if just one channel is really loud. So that way you can get a little bit of extra volume, extra loudness by unlinking or gradually unlinking the channels. That's why you see on like FabFilter Pro L2, for example, if you click the expert settings, you see transient and release unlinking. You can unlink the transients and the release separately, actually. And even just unlinking the transients to a degree will give you a little more room to push the limiter without artifacts, without distortion, and without the weird crackling that happens on the other side. So, and same with compressors too. Like sometimes if, like you said, that loud voice on the one side, if that really triggers the compressor a lot, it might like add some undesirable effect to the other side, although that is completely unnecessary. So if you unlink the two, you might have to squash that one loud thing, but the other one can still remain like clear and have all the room it needs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's like, it is a simple concept, but you just kind of got to think your way through it and then get familiar with the idea, and then it'll help you just kind of make those decisions on the fly. The last example I could give, because knowing this helps you set up your sessions a little bit.
Yeah.
And another common thing, like people run into CPU issues if they don't have like a powerful computer. And I think Benny and I have been doing this professionally for so long that we don't even remember that's a thing sometimes.
Yeah.
So we're just like, just open up Neural DSP, fly. But they're pretty plug-in, the CPU heavy, really. They're great plugins, but they take resources. And a lot of these kind of mono instance plugins actually have, they call them stereo mode, but it's really dual mono mode, where you can throw one instance of a Neural DSP amp sim, for example, on a bus, and then switch it into dual mono, and now you can feed it to a hard pan left and right DI, and it's going to give you like, two individual sounding guitars off the one plugin, right? I hope that makes sense. Am I explaining this well, Benny?
Absolutely. I'm not so convinced, though, that it's actually more CPU friendly.
It's probably not. It's probably just running the processing twice.
Yeah, in my head, it's like I might be wrong. In my head, it should be, the way it should be is like a mono instance only processes one channel, and a stereo instance processes two, so it should be doubling the amount. But I don't know. Maybe even the fact that you don't have to have the graphics and all of that, maybe that helps. So
right.
It's definitely not hungrier than the mono.
It's definitely not more hungry. No, and it's a lot easier to manipulate. Like you just then are just tweaking one plugin, and you don't have to group them together or whatever, or accidentally forgot that you ungrouped and shit like that. Swearing for no reason.
Yeah, but I totally get the swearing there, because this is annoying as hell. And like I don't know for why that is, but especially with some of the Neural DSP plugins, which I love, by the way, but with some of them, even if I link two channels and because I want to tweak one amp, but here both sides change, sometimes this doesn't work. Sometimes some of the parameters don't it just, whatever reason, the knobs still only move on one side. And so this gave me trouble sometimes. And it took me a long time, honestly, as well, to realize that I could use one stereo instance of an amp sim on 2 DIs and I have all my rhythm guitars covered. And it's really 2 amps. Like, I didn't even realize that because it looks so weird to have one amp that 2 DIs go through, but it works perfectly if you want the same settings.
That's the way to do it for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, all right. So I think that's really it. Remember, next time when you look at a compressor plugin and it says it has linking options, know that there's 2 different things this could mean: linking the controls or linking the sidechain, or both. Like, this different things. And I'm thinking, I say this because I can think of a few plugins that I use where I thought I unlinked them, when I actually just unlinked the controls, but the sidechains were still linked because it's 2 different buttons for those things. So this is one thing to keep in mind. Then maybe go over this whole like stereo versus mono thing again, what the difference actually is. And then think about how you want to treat your stereo groups or signals, and like how much they have in common, if anything, and if it makes sense to let the compressor react to both sides the same way at once, or to let the compressor act like it was 2 mono instances on 2 different channels, just summed together on one group. So I think that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, hopefully that demystifies it a little bit for you all out there.
All right.
It really will make sense if you play with it a little bit, I promise.
As always, send us questions. If you have any, comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is also available as a video podcast. So if you go to YouTube and just type in the Self-Recording Band, you'll find our channel. So, put your comment below. Let us know what you're struggling with, or if there was anything unclear that we said there, or maybe we said there was something that was actually wrong. So please feel free to correct us. And then also, of course, like I said in the beginning, if you need help implementing this stuff and you don't want to figure it out on your own, just go to the selfrecordingband.com/call and schedule a free clarity call with me. You have to go through an application process because we can only take on so many students, but you can apply for our coaching program. And if we decide it could be a good fit for you, then we jump on a completely free first call and we talk about where you are right now, where you want to go, what a potential roadmap could look like for you. And then we're going to come to a solution. We're going to recommend a solution for you. And that could be go figure it out on your own. That could be do it with us. That could be hire a pro, whatever. The goal is to get to a solution that will help you achieve your goals. And let's do that on a completely free call. And if it is a great fit, we're happy to work with you and help you implement all this complex stuff that we're talking about on the podcast all the time. All right. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care. Bye.